Have you heard that if you have insomnia, you should make sure to leave the bed within 15 minutes if you can't fall asleep, and only return to bed if you feel really sleepy? Have you perhaps tried this and found it not to be very helpful? Or have you just wondered if this is something you should do or not? Well, if you said yes to any of the above, this class is going to be perfect for you, because in this class, we're going to understand why there is such a thing as the 15-minute rule. We're going to understand what conditioned arousal is, and we're going to see the big problem with this kind of thinking, and of course, the alternative that leads to where we want to be, which is a place of peaceful sleep and peace of mind. Welcome back to this edition of Insomnia Insight, in which we're going to go over something that I get a lot of questions about, which is this 15-minute rule and conditioned arousal and how we should approach this. So I hope it'll bring a lot of value your way. And for anyone out there who's thinking like, 15-minute rule, what is that? I've never heard of it. Well, I kind of reviewed it already in the intro, but let's go over it one more time so we know what we're talking about. The 15-minute rule goes something like this. If you've spent 15 minutes in bed and you can't fall asleep, then you should leave the bed, and you should only go back once you're feeling ready to sleep again, once you're feeling sleepy again. This is the 15-minute rule. Sometimes we come across the 15-minute rule as an isolated tip for insomnia on the World Wide Web. Sometimes we come across it as part of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, where it is known as stimulus control. And in this class, we're going to have 4 sections to study this further. Firstly, we're going to look at the problem with the 15-minute rule, the big problem with the 15-minute rule and conditioned arousal. And then we're going to look at reality, what actually is behind this common experience of finding yourself alert in bed. And then we're going to see what the fallout is from the 15-minute rule and why it's so problematic. And finally, we're going to look at the alternative path, which leads where we want to be, right? So that's the outline. And let's start with number 1, the problem. Okay. So to understand the problem, we're going to first take a look at what type of idea is behind the 15-minute rule. And this rule comes from the world of behavioralism, the behavioralist mindset, if you will. And if you're thinking like, what is that behavioralism? Well, think of Pavlov and his dogs. Right? Pavlov showed that he could get dogs to salivate, not when they got food, but when a bell was ringed that preceded them getting the food, right? And so, with that in mind, the idea of why conditioned arousal and an association creates insomnia goes something like this. We find ourselves awake in bed for some reason. Maybe we went to bed quite early, or maybe we're stressed, or maybe something was going on. Anyway, we found ourselves awake in bed, and then the brain started associating wakefulness with the bed rather than sleep with the bed, right? So the next time we went to bed, the brain was like, oh, I'm in bed, I'm supposed to be awake here, and then made us wake up. And then this kind of repeats itself because we spend a lot of time awake in bed, and the brain starts to associate the bed with being awake. And the idea is that, okay, this is why we have insomnia. And this arousal from just seeing the bed or being in bed is known as conditioned arousal. There's kind of a condition for this arousal, which is this like link between the bed and wakefulness that we discussed. And when you have this view of insomnia as in like a problem of conditioned arousal, then the idea naturally becomes that you've got to break this cycle by not spending so much time in bed that you're awake. And this is where the 15-minute rule comes from. This is the idea behind the 15-minute rule. The idea is to limit the time we are awake in bed, and when we like return to bed only when we're sleepy, or go to bed only when we feel really sleepy, then we will fall asleep quickly, and the association between the bed as a place where we sleep will be reestablished. And when that's reestablished, we will no longer have any problems with sleep. We will have no more insomnia. This is the idea behind conditioned arousal, stimulus control and the 15-minute rule. And now you might have gone like, okay, this kind of sounds like it makes sense. It sounds kind of logical to me. So what's the big problem you're talking about here, Daniel? What is the issue here? Well, there is actually a big problem here. Big misunderstanding here. And that misunderstanding is that sleep is not an active behavior. Sleep is not a skill. Sleep is not something we can train ourselves to do. In fact, sleep is a passive, automatic process, just like thinking or feeling or digestion or what have you. And we can start to explore this by asking ourselves this question, like, will we do our bed daily if we get a big reward? I said award here, but anyway, that kind of works. If we get an award, or if we're punished if we don't do our bed? In all likelihood, yes, right? So we can see that, like, this is just evidence that, like, this active behavior, like doing our bed, can be produced by rewarding it or by, like, punish the absence of it, right? But if we ask ourselves, like, will we sleep more if we are rewarded for sleeping more? If we get like a star for sleeping a lot, or we get punished if we don't sleep? The answer, of course, becomes no. No, if somebody's telling us, like, you'll get a big reward here if you sleep a lot, we'll get performance anxiety. We'll sleep less. Like, if somebody says, like, if you don't sleep, then there's going to be some punishment for it. That just makes us stressed and we sleep less, right? So here we can already see that there's a problem with this idea of, like, thinking of sleep as an active behavior or as a skill. Again, sleep is a passive, automatic process, like thinking or feeling. And if we take this idea further, we can ask ourselves the question: would it make sense to try to make somebody enjoy ballet by trying to force that association between feeling joyful and watching ballet? So how would we do that? We'd be like, okay, you don't like ballet? Okay, fine. What we're going to do is, like, you're going to sit outside the show, and once you feel really happy, excited, then you go in and watch the ballet. And if you do this repeatedly, you're actually going to start to enjoy ballet. You can see this doesn't make any sense. Like, this type of, like, association cannot be forced this way. We can also think of it, use another example, like, imagine trying to cure anorexia using the same logic. That would be like, oh, you have started associating the dinner table with not eating. We have to change that. So you have to just, like, wait till you're really hungry and then go to the dinner table and eat, and then you'll start associating the dinner table. We're like, this is a huge part missing there. Is, like, thinking of, let's say, anorexia as just like a behavior problem misses a whole world of, like, ideas and thoughts and fears and kind of like attempts to escape this that happened before, right? This is just like thinking of it as simple behavior. It just doesn't make any sense, right? Just the final example that just came to me a minute ago was, like, if we not look at sleep at wakefulness, imagine, like, we have somebody who's a professional driver, a long distance driver, and who really wants to make sure they don't fall asleep at the wheels, right? Imagine trying to make sure that a truck driver doesn't fall asleep while driving, using the same logic as above. Then what we do would be, like, having the person, like, drive while making them really alert, like, I don't know, loud sounds and something like that, and be like, okay, now we've associated driving with wakefulness. Now you won't have any problem falling asleep again. Again, we see that this lacks logic. It doesn't make any sense, because, again, being awake also is not like be an active behavior, right? And we can look at it from a different way. If we really believe that associating with the bed or being in bed with wakefulness would cause insomnia, then guess what? Then we could easily induce insomnia. We could just be like, oh, we need a study here where we have 50 people with insomnia. Okay, good. So we'll just take 50 people and have them spend, like, 5 hours every day in bed, and they'll get insomnia, which they, of course, won't, right? And all the above is just to show this big misunderstanding within the framework of parts of CBT-I definitively, the framework of the 15-minute rule, there's a huge misunderstanding there. It doesn't make any sense. So what is the reality here? What is the truth here? And you can easily kind of challenge what I've said with the lived experience of actually becoming like immediately hyper alert the moment you go to bed. Let's say you felt really relaxed, sleepy, and the moment, but that the moment you go to bed, you feel like hyper alert, right? Then you can say like, this clearly is conditioned arousal, Daniel. Like this is a completely like automatic thing that happens whenever I go to bed. I would say then that there is actually an association that is making you wide awake when you go to bed, but that association is not between the bed and wakefulness. It is between wakefulness and danger. It is of thinking of not sleeping as a threat, something that can harm you, something that should be happening, something that you should try to escape. That is what creates this experience of like becoming wide awake when you go to bed, or even thinking of the bed, So the actual association that creates insomnia is associating wakefulness with danger, or thinking of not sleeping as a threat. This is the source of insomnia. We can explore this further by thinking of it this way. If associating the bed with wakefulness, if that was the reason we have insomnia, why would we also feel really panicky when we see like a cat yawning? We see like a cat yawning, and then we're like, oh my gosh, right? We can become like palpitations, hands sweating, and things of that nature. That has nothing to do with the bed, right? But it's the same thing. It's the cat yawning reminds us of like the threat of not sleeping. Like, oh my gosh, what if I don't sleep tonight? And then we become wide awake, right? And again, another way we can kind of challenge that idea of the bed wake association being the reason for insomnia is like, if that was a thing, then why would we consider insomnia like an anxiety type struggle, right? If the bed made us awake, then we would just be awake, right? That's all that would happen. We would be a little awake a bit longer, and that's all, right? If we would just become awake by being in bed, that wouldn't explain why we're concerned, why we're worried, why we're thinking about this all day long, right? So again, it shows that there's something definitely missing here. It's the association between not sleeping and danger, threat. That what creates this insomnia. So seeing a cat, sorry, this is typo here that we have to fix. Seeing a cat yawn makes us again think of a threat, and that makes us scared. The bed sheets, the pillow covers, etc., so they're all innocent. They're not interesting whatsoever. Insomnia, I think, it comes again from thinking of not sleeping as a threat. And if we go to bed and then we're thinking like, now it's time for me to sleep, I should sleep now, but what if I don't sleep? That leads us to have this panicky state of feeling. And what sometimes can happen is that it can seem like the bed automatically makes us really fearful because we're just not aware of the thoughts that produced that panic. And then it can look like it's just automatic, but there are always thoughts in the background. And that's the missing link. So the missing link between, conditions like our bed or the bedroom environment and our state of mind is how we think of those conditions, which I just mentioned. And the thing is that this understanding that it's not like the conditions, the room, the bed that makes us feel a certain way, but how we think about it is actually a very pervasive understanding that is present in every single helpful framework. Whether you look at like Stoic philosophy or like Buddhist philosophy or CBT or ACT or mindfulness-based therapy or within our framework, whatever you look at, this understanding that it's not what happened to us, the conditions, circumstances that matters the most. It's how we interpret, how we think of it, the narrative, the story tell about it. That's what really matters in terms of our life experience. This is, a very agreed upon understanding, which makes it so surprising that this 15-minute rule exists, because again, it's part of CBT-I, but even within CBT, it is well known that a bed is not going to make you scared. The bedroom is not going to make you scared. It's how we think of it that matters. So I don't really know how the 15-minute rule, which is like this remnant of behavioral thinking, is remaining mainstream, why it is so common, right? Yes, here's it is a kind of like, I already said this, but I wrote note to myself, remember though, we don't always see our thoughts, and feeling states can appear to be automatic, but there are always thoughts behind them, which is, again, also a very, very common understanding. All right, so we talked about like the problem with the 15-minute rule. We talked about what really insomnia is really about, and the association that really matters. And now we're going to spend a little time talking about like why the 15-minute rule creates so much struggle for us when we have insomnia. The 15-minute rule creates a lot of struggle because I wrote down an A, B, and C here. A, it encourages clock monitoring and performance anxiety. When somebody tells us, oh, if you haven't fallen asleep within 15 minutes, then you got to leave the bed, that implies that we should fall asleep within 15 minutes. It's not normal to be awake after 15 minutes. And that creates performance anxiety. We think like, oh, I have to fall asleep within 15 minutes. I only have 15 minutes to fall asleep, right? And that creates sleep struggles. Because peaceful sleep is an effortless problem. And when we have this effort, this pressure, this tension, then that creates struggle for us and performance anxiety. And so does the other part of the 15-minute rule, which is the one where it says like, well, you should leave the bed and only go back when you feel sleepy again. This implies that we have to feel like sleepy enough or really sleepy before we go to bed or before we return to bed, which makes us think like, oh, there is a correct state of mind. There's an ideal state of mind required for sleep to happen. And that is feeling really sleepy, which leads to self-monitoring, which leads to anxiety around that, which leads to like, oh, am I sleepy enough? Maybe I should wait a little longer. Is this a time for me? Like it leads to all this like uncertainty and struggle when we like are trying to determine if we are sleepy enough to go back to bed. It's also very, very tricky. And it also teaches us that we should try to avoid what we have started to think of as a threat. We should avoid being awake, essentially, is what this rule teaches us. We should like, oh, if you're awake, that's not good. Like go over there, right? And if you're sleepy, that's good. Then go back and try to sleep, right? It's also contrasting to another hyper common and I believe very true understanding that you find in all these helpful frameworks, like whether you look at Stoic philosophy, Buddhism, like common sense, whatever you look at, nobody will tell you, oh, you're afraid of something, then run away. That will help. Every framework you look at will tell you, no, if you're afraid of something that is actually not a real threat, then the most helpful thing is to face it, to not try to run away from it. That is very pervasive understanding, which I believe is very, very true. Yet the 15-minute rule is teaching us like, try to escape it, try to run away from it, don't face it, like get away from it as soon as you can, right? So it's very, very tricky. And this is why the fallout of the 15-minute rule is that it increases our struggles with sleep. So then what is the alternative, right? If we've heard about the 15-minute rule, maybe we tried it and didn't help, or maybe we're hearing this and we're like, no, I don't want to go down a path. So what path do I want to go down instead? What's the alternative? Well, I think something really, really helpful is the timeless way. The timeless way, where we don't monitor how long we've been in bed or how long it took us to fall asleep, where we don't track how many times we woke up. We don't try to find out. And a practical way is to set an alarm when it's time for us to start our day. That way, if we wake up in the middle of the night, we don't need to check the time. We just know like, oh, it's not my time to start the day anymore. Like I can just wait for my alarm. And then on the evening side, we can be like, when we feel like my day is over, I think instead of the daytime energy, which is like doing stuff, achieving things, doing our job, like getting stuff done, we go into like the night energy, which is like, or night mode, which is like no obligations, no pressure to do anything. That's like night mode. And if we think like, yeah, I want to go into night mode at around like 10 p.m., then we're like, okay, from 10 p.m. and until our alarm goes off in the morning, we're just like, we don't try to perform. We don't try to do stuff. We don't check the time. We don't know what time it is. We just go to bed when we feel like it, just like that. If you feel like to go to bed, that's your time to go to bed. No pressure, no rules. And another part of the alternative way is befriending wakefulness. Instead of like trying to like jump out of bed because we're awake in bed and we think like, oh, I shouldn't be awake in my bed, then we can be like, oh, I'm awake and I'm in my bed and I can read a book or listen to a podcast or watch some Netflix or teach my brain that being awake is not a danger. Because remember, the association that drives insomnia is the association between wakefulness and danger. And if we're awake at night, which we have thought was not good, was a danger, something to avoid, and we're instead looking at that as like an opportunity to do something we like, or just as a time to rest, or anything that isn't, even if we hate being awake at night, even if we really don't want to be awake at night and we're honest with ourselves, we're just like, all I want to do is sleep right now. I hate the fact that I'm awake at night. Well, we can still be like, I hate it, but I can't do anything about it, right? And kind of accept it. And that's also befriending wakefulness. So these are two things I want to highlight, but they're just part of everything we teach here, right? So there's more. So everything we teach here is really part of that alternative path that leads to where you want to be. And really, whatever you see leads you to seeing that being awake is not a threat, that will lead to where you want to be, which is a place of peaceful sleep and peaceful mind. And there are no rules required. I'll conclude there. Hope you found a lot of value here. Look forward to hearing your comments on this episode and see you back real soon. Bye for now. Hi, it's me, Daniel, and I hope you found a ton of value in the video that you just watched. But do know that we have more than our free content that can really help you leave insomnia land and arrive at a place of peaceful sleep for the rest of your life. And I know this because I used to work as a sleep doctor and I was frustrated. I used to see patients in clinic, offer education and support, and then I have my patient follow up in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 weeks at best. But I knew that in between our visits, my patients had no support, no guidance, and no help. So I wanted to create something entirely different from that. And this is what went into the Insomnia Immunity program and BedTyme. In both programs, there is a curated curriculum that gives you education in a step-by-step fashion. And there's also a coach that can answer your questions on an ongoing basis. And this was exactly what I wish I had when I was a sleep doctor. And now it's available for you. You can explore more on our website, thesleepcoachschool.com. And if you decide to join, then we can't wait to see you on the other side.